All right. So we start now with the Renaissance and the Reformation, and that is the unit's title. And we are saying that first subtopic of that is the Sacerdotium Imperium controversy. Okay, now first I'll have to do some little bit, very quickly, I promise you, a groundwork from the past. I don't know if I had discussed this with you. I had discussed it with someone, but I don't know if I had discussed this with you. Now, while we are doing this whole political thought or political philosophy thing, one of the problems that we face is that, most of early political philosophy was written in Greek language. And I mean political philosophy. People could talk about political philosophy because politics are all derivatives of the main Greek institution, which was the polis, Polis. So the Greeks could talk about all these things based upon the fact that they were living in a polis. And if you look at starting from Plato and Aristotle, you will see that the real discussions on how a good polis is to be run begin. We all call Plato's book the Republic. The original title in Greek of the Republic is Politeia, and Politeia in for Plato, at least in Greek, it meant a society which was morally the best and had or could be sustained because of the fact that it was deeply embedded in morality. And you must understand that for the Greeks, we can use ethics and morals interchangeably. Okay, but by the time we come down to the modern period, we can't use them interchangeably anymore. I'll talk about that when we come to the modern period. So you can call it ethics, you can call it morals, whatever it is. Plato's philosophy is deeply morally political. Now, if you look at Aristotle, it is the same, even though the solutions that are being suggested by Aristotle for the attainment of a great politeia, again, though he doesn't, the book that is attributed to him is not called politeia. And I say the book that is attributed to him because he didn't write any books at all. You should know this. He believed in, people will tell you, the school that he ran was named after named Lyceum. Lyceum is not a name, it's a generic Greek word, which in English is peripatetic. Peripatetic is discussing while walking. Okay, it's something which is discussing while walking. And Aristotle's method of instruction was not really like this, sitting and telling people, this is this, this is what is this, this is what is that. It was mainly in the form of discussions that he held with many of his students. So Lyceum was because he used to walk around and talk to his students. That's why it was called the Lyceum. And basically, while he was doing this, uh, what happened is a number of his students took down notes. Now, I cannot answer this question if you ask me. How did they take down notes? Because in those days, you didn't have the paper and a device like a pen or a pencil, which you can write on it and take notes. So most people say it is from their memory that they went back and wrote on whatever they use, usually tablets of stone. So they did it out of memory. The ideas that they discussed with Aristotle. All right, so the books are not written by him, but they are written on his name by his students because those are his ideas. So you see, as long as the polis existed, the reason for talking about politics, political, politia, all this existed. But once Greeks went into decline and was replaced by the Roman civilization, in Latin, you don't find the usage of politics. Why? Simple reason that Romans did not have a political institution like the polis. So when they translated Greek texts into Latin, they did what we call approximation. So the Romans had an ancient republic before Julius Caesar converted it into a huge monarchy and an empire. Before that, it was some kind of an ancient republic. And so they translated Plato's Politia into what in Latin became res publica. Res, R-E-S, res publica, P-U-B-L-I-C-A, which in English, in modern English especially, became the Republic. Okay? Now, but if you look at history, you will see that once the Greek period, the brilliance of the Greek period comes to an end, you do not have uh, anybody. You do not have anybody who basically did anything worth talking about in Greece. So the entire focus shifted to ancient Rome. Now, when the Romans took over, it was their basic necessities that conditioned the movement of what we today call political philosophy and what they simply call philosophy. Okay. And it was more about jurisprudence and not so much about how the world came into existence and what was the what do we say? What was the correct kind of social organization? They didn't have all these concerns. And once it converted into an empire, the only thing they were interested in was basically talking about uh, the distinguishing between the Romans and the people that they had defeated. Okay, so the Romans did not believe in equality. They did not believe that everybody had anything called a right. Now, so what you find is that the Romans were looking at ways of creation of laws. Okay, creation of laws. What would be the basis of the creation of laws? And for them, the main thing is they wanted to distinguish between the Romans and the people who had been conquered by the Romans. So entitlements which were given to the Romans, which we today call rights, by the way. In those days, there was no usage of the word rights. Entitlements. What were people entitled to? So the Romans were entitled to a few things, which I shall not go into, which other people who had been conquered were not entitled to. So you had the birth of slavery, and this slavery was different from the slavery that you see in Aristotle. Now, this slavery actually believed that the people who were slaves were inferior because they had been defeated in wars, and so they had to serve their Roman masters. That is the idea of slavery. So, when it came to the administration of the territories of the conquered people and what were also called the protectorates, which were those that said, we don't want to fight the Romans. We accept your superiority. Just leave us alone. We'll go by what you say. And so the protectorates, one of them being Jerusalem, and the other one being Babylon, all of these were under Roman control. They would be a prefect, Pontius Pilate, the notorious prefect during the times when Jesus was put on the cross, apparently. So you find that these protectorates were following what the Romans told them to do, but they didn't really get the freedoms and entitlements that Roman had for themselves. But they were not slaves either. They had a few entitlements. I am not going to go into all that. So you find the disappearance in the Roman period of the usage of words like political, politics, all these things, anything that has anything to do with polis, just disappeared. It doesn't figure in the language of the Romans, which is Latin. And you'll see that once the Roman period was supplanted by Christianity, and Christianity became extremely powerful. Okay, and it became powerful because of the fact that the Roman Emperor Constantine uh, made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so, from the time of Constantine, it was no longer just the Roman Empire, it was a Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so now there's a very interesting argument that the historian James Weiser uh, presents here. He calls Rome a universal pragmatic civilization, which is that Rome was pragmatic in the sense that it was practical. It wanted to grow in size, which it did very impressively at that, and occupied most of it occupied most of Western Europe, also parts of Eastern Europe, and it also occupied uh, Africa. Parts of Africa were also occupied there. And so you will find that there is uh, this huge length and breadth. And the Romans did come almost out till the boundaries of India. And so you will see that the Roman Empire was very grand, and it had to be divided for administrative convenience into two. One which was the Western Roman Empire, which had its capital in Rome, needless to say, and there was also the Eastern Roman Empire, which took care of the areas that were in Africa, Asia, uh, and even Eastern Europe, areas in the Mediterranean. And you'll find that this Eastern Roman Empire was administered from Constantinople, which was named after Constantine, the emperor, by the way. And Constantinople is present day Istanbul in Turkey. And so you see that Roman Empire was, in terms of its organization, in terms of structure, something which had no parallel in history, either before it or after it. So you find here that not just political disappear, also philosophy also disappears. And even though there are certain pieces of writing of people like Cicero and maybe even Seneca to a certain extent, uh, you will find that most of the writing is centered around jurisprudence and not around philosophical questions, which are either epistemological or ontological. It weren't. So if you look at this history, therefore, what you find there is no mention of anything called political philosophy, political thought. None of them. Political theory, they're not there. They're absent. And to get back to the argument that I was talking about, James Weiser says the Romans were tremendously successful in unifying territories by conquering them. They basically conquered lots and lots of areas across different parts of the world, unified them. So that is why he called it a pragmatic civilization, which was universal. Universal because it was huge, very, very huge. But he says it also failed. Where did it fail? It failed in unifying people. It didn't unify people simply because of the fact that it didn't want to treat the conquered people as the equals of Romans. And since it didn't want to treat the conquered people as Romans, or give the same entitlements to them as the Romans had, there was a lack of unification of spirit of the people. The spirit here, not in the ghostly sense, nor in the alcoholic sense. The spirit here is that unseen thing that you have. You'll say, when somebody puts up a great fight against, the odds, when they are stacked against you, the odds, when you put up a great fight, then you basically say it was a spirited performance, which is, we refer to the human spirit while we are alive, not the ghostly one. Okay, so it did not spiritually unite people. There was no feeling that we all belong to one empire. So people were fragmented in a territory that was unified, which essentially meant that the unification had to be maintained through the use of coercive mechanisms such as force, army, and punishments, and all those kind of things. Now, with all apology to Christians, neither the Romans nor the subsequent generations of some of the thinkers did not treat Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Now, the identity of Jesus Christ itself has gone through a very interesting metaphorical transformations. You find that he started off as the Son of God, sorry. And so you had the Holy Trinity, which is God, the Son, which is Jesus, and the Ghost. Originally, it was what should I say? Originally, it was the Holy Ghost, but since Ghost has different meanings now. Meanings mutate, like I said, over time. So because of those mutations, you see that there is a tendency to see ghosts as occult. They are bad spirits, and they are not something that should be uh, basically, they should not be uh, seen as something to be worshipped. So, especially the Americans changed the Holy Ghost to the Holy Spirit. Okay, so here the Spirit is in the universal spiritual sense. So you will see that the Holy Spirit is something which pervades the universe along with God. And later on, we find that, especially among the Catholics, Jesus became God Himself. So today, there are a lot of people, even among the Protestants, who believe that Jesus Himself is God. They don't see Him as Son of God in many parts of the world today. They see Him as God. But before this mutation, which happened perhaps in the 20th century and that in the second half of the 20th century, you will find that there is this tendency on the part of the people to look at the entire Trinity and look at Jesus Christ as the mortal Son of God. So it is believed that Jesus said that I am dying on the cross for the sins committed by all of humanity. So he himself admitted that he was dying. All right. And initial accounts in Christianity talked about death of Jesus, which later underwent some kind of revisionism. And they said, that he disappeared from his grave by the third day, which is Sunday. So Good Friday is the day when he was crucified because he was put on a cross and nailed to it and left to die. And then they lowered his body on the second day, which is Saturday, and put him in a grave. Now you must understand, in those days, graves were not what we call graves today. Graves today are understood as those which are dug up, earth which is dug up. You put the body, if you're a Christian, in a coffin, or if you are a Muslim, in a coffin, which is a white cloth, and you put them into the ground. It's called interring or burial. You bury them and cover the earth up and even put a tombstone or whatever. But in those days, that was not the idea of a grave. There were a number of small little labyrinths of caves. Okay, a number of caves, and people just took the dead and left them in the caves, which is what they did with Jesus as well. So when somebody went on the third day, Sunday, they didn't find Jesus there, meaning they didn't find his body there in that cave. So the Christians assumed that Jesus had risen and gone back to heaven. So he didn't really die. Even his body didn't die. He not just a spirit. His body also did not die. He had gone back to heaven. Okay, so that is the Easter Sunday. You have all these Monty Thursdays, which I don't want to get into right now. So the Christian faith uh, believes that Christ is at one time Son of God and at another time God Himself. And so the philosophers, especially people like Machiavelli, who we will be talking about in this very unit, I think, and later on, philosophers like Hegel and Nietzsche, all of them basically talk of Jesus as an astute, intelligent human being who succeeded in bringing down the might of the Roman Empire. Now, remember, the Roman civilization was a robustly military civilization. So, what does that mean when you say that it is a robustly military civilization? It basically means that it was ready to protect itself from any kind of military threat to it. So it was almost impregnable in terms of somebody going to war with weapons against the Romans and defeating them. And so at this particular juncture, you have this extremely astute man who succeeded in unifying the people, especially the ones who are being ill-treated by the Romans, especially those who were being ill-treated by the Romans. Those people he had basically united. So you see that, stories about Jesus Christ are all about how he went to leper colonies, and lepers were not even allowed to come out and show their faces. People were so afraid of lepers, but Jesus went to them and preached compassion. And he talked about two things. One, which he called God's favorites, and the other, which is equality. Now, what are God's favorites? Or who are God's favorites? Sorry. God's favorites are those who undergo uh, corporeal, corporeal uh, torture on earth, and uh, they do not lose their faith in God. So God tests the faith of those whom he loves. So those who went through the pain and suffering in this ephemeral world, this world was not seen as a world that was the final place of resting for anyone, especially human beings. And it was just a transitory place. You know? something like a bus stop or a train station. And if you underwent suffering here, you were rewarded by God when you died. You went to heaven, and you would basically be returning to paradise. Um, Paradise is actually the term used for heaven. Uh, and I'm not going to go into the story of Adam and Eve and the original sin of Eve. No, maybe if there is a necessity, we'll talk about that later. But you must understand that if you went through suffering here, then you had your place reserved in paradise. And everybody knows about Islam promising the jihadis 64 virgins if they died and went to Jannah, which is their version of paradise. And nobody tells you that the Christians promised, Christ himself promised that if you went through this life on earth, through going through the suffering without losing faith in God, then you would be rewarded with a place in paradise with 72 virgins. This is something that not many people will tell you. Okay? So, this was one of the promises that the Christians also made. So, one, of course, doesn't know how these virgins were going to be produced, from where they were going to be produced, because even Eve was made out of the rib of Adam. These religions are so robustly patriarchal that even the process of birthing those who gave birth was attributed to men rather than women. So Eve was made out of, the first woman was made out of the rib of man, so which was Adam. So you see, that is patriarchal religion at work for you. And so what you're looking at here is this idea that you will find permanent rewards, permanent pleasures after your death in this ephemeral world when you go to heaven, paradise. So, what does this mean? This basically means that Jesus was able to gain the confidence of all those people who were forsaken by the Romans and others, and he was able to unify them and say that in the eyes of God, there is no one who is superior, there is no one who is inferior. In the eyes of God, all are equal. This is what Christ says. So, if all are equal in the eyes of God, then that is a denial of the Roman idea that the Romans were superior. Now, they had brought together people by conquering territories, but they didn't bring them together as one Lord who belonged to the Roman Empire. So since that didn't happen, what happened is that all these people who developed faith through Christ in God, they were spiritually united, meaning when somebody says that there is no body who is superior to anyone else, and when somebody also says that uh, God tests uh, those to see if their faith is strong enough for a permanent place in paradise and not in hell. Okay, so when somebody says that, then obviously people found a lot of emotional solace from this kind of uh, idea that was spread among people by Jesus. And Jesus was also the first person who can be called the non-violinist, not violinist, but one who did not believe in violence. What we attribute famously to Mahatma Gandhi. I don't know if any of you know anything about Mahatma Gandhi now, because he has been condemned to the stature of a useless fellow in Indian history, the most useless fellow in Indian history. But during the glory days when Mahatma Gandhi was seen as a Mahatma, a true Mahatma, he said, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, don't hit him back. Show him your other cheek. Show him your other cheek and ask him to hit you. That was the spirit of non-violence that Gandhi borrowed from Jesus Christ. This very example was that which was there in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is one of those gatherings of people who came to listen to Jesus. And he said, you cannot conquer the Romans or anyone who uses force by using force yourself in return. You can't. That has already been demonstrated because you've lost to the Romans. So what can you do? You can put them to shame. You can put them to shame by undergoing the suffering without protesting. Okay? Without protesting, just undergo the suffering that the Romans are putting you through. So, without protest is not an idea that you'll find in Gandhi. Gandhi believed in protest, civil disobedience. But this idea of non-violence and showing the other cheek when you're being slapped on one cheek is something that he got from Jesus through the medium of Tolstoy, the Russian writer. Gandhi was a very, very big uh, fan of Tolstoy and his writings. And Tolstoy was a very pious Orthodox Christian. but not in the Dostoevskian sense. Uh, Dostoevsky is also a very pious Orthodox Christian from Russia, almost a contemporary of Tolstoy, but very different, very intense. Uh, that is Dostoevsky. Tolstoy is not that intense. He's much more accessible. And uh, a lot of the information about Christianity uh, went to Gandhi through the medium of Tolstoy. And but the progenitor of the whole idea of non-violence and fighting violence with non-violence goes to Jesus Christ. And what he said is that ultimately the Romans will feel a sense of shame actually happen. And that is the reason why Emperor Constantine said, "We shall not confront Christianity, since it is binding people together. And if it can bind people together, then it is something that we must adopt ourselves." So Christianity became the religion of the Romans. And like I said, it became the Holy Roman Empire. Now, when the Holy Roman Empire came into being, this was around the 4th century CE. And you will find that in the coming centuries, there was a consolidation of the power of the Christian religious institutions like the church, basically the church. Uh, the church became so powerful that the power of the Roman emperor almost faded into insignificance before the power of the Pope or Il Papa, the Father. Okay, and what Christianity under the church, under the Roman church, preached was that this world is the creation of God. This idea is called creationism, okay, that the universe is created by God, which goes against the theory of evolution Darwin talked about, or rather, Darwin goes against the theory of creationism. And they basically, the creationists, the Christians, they argue that the world was the domain of God, the universe, if you like, was the domain of God because of one fact, and that is, He created. So the true monarch of the world is God. And the earthly representation of God is the institution called the church, headed by the Pope. So that is why Il Papa became so powerful. He was seen as a direct representative of God. So the first superpower, perhaps, in the world was not a country, but an institution called the church, and its head, the Pope. So you see this particular kind of attitude among the Christians led to, and as Christianity grew further and further, it led to the unification of more and more people. So you have somebody like Saint Augustine in the 6th century CE. Augustine talks about this world being civitas Dei. Civitas is unfortunately translated as city here. No, civitas is that which is civic, that which is civilized, and that is Dei, D-E-I, Dei is that it is godly. So the entire universe is the domain of God. That is the true meaning of Civitas Dei, not what you read as translations, which are very poor, which say that it is the city of God. Okay, it's not the city of God, it is the entire universe. So that is the domain of God. And with this, you have the further growth in the power of the church. And as the church grew in power, and when it started using a language which took recourse to greater and greater spiritualist ideas, the political is again nowhere to be seen. So you have this very famous writer called Otto Gierke. He's a German, as you can see from his name, OTTO, Otto. And Gierke is Gierke, pronounced Gierke. Some people say Gierke, that's also okay. So Otto Gierke is considered to be a great scholar of medievalism and what happened during the medieval times. Now, so this man has written a book which is available in English as Political Thought in the Middle Ages. That is what the title says. Political Thought in the Middle Ages. So I was surprised. Why would somebody as scholarly as Kierkegaard use a word that didn't exist in the medieval period or the Middle Ages as they are called, which is political thought? The phrase, why would he use this phrase? So I made it a point to go and read this book again and again 3 times. And in the entire text of the book, you don't find the mention of the word politics, political, nothing. You don't find that. Now, how did it become the title of that book is something that I can't answer. Is that a wrong translation? Or is that something that is being done for marketing purposes? I don't know, because capitalism likes to sell, and they sell what people want. And if people want to understand what political thought was there in the medieval period, then they'll basically put a title like that. But if you read the book, you will find that there is not one place where the word political thought or the phrase political thought basically exists in that book. Okay, now, therefore, it basically means that from the time that the Greek civilization went into decline to the time that the Christian civilization went into a bit of a decline, which was around the 15th century, 16th century, with the exception of Machiavelli. Nobody uses the word political, politics, or any of these iterations of politics. Nobody uses them because there is no polis. Civitas Dei is what people were talking about. And Civitas Dei essentially means the domain of God. The civilization of God. That is Civitas Dei. That which is civil, that which is civic. The modern word civics and civil, the other word, both come from civitas. Okay? Actually, they come from not directly from civitas, they come from civilis, which is what you find in early Roman literature. What was called a morally good polis by Aristotle and Plato got translated into Latin as societas civilis. Societas, society, civilis, is civil, which has now become civil society. Civil society, as it is, had a myriad number of meanings. And today it is used to suggest anything that is not governmental, that is civil society. But we'll talk about that later when we come to John Locke. That is when you'll find the revival of civil society. But then, till then, it is civitas. So it is not even society, really. Okay? So it is a civilization, it is a civic thing, which is your duty to the universe, to God. That is how you have to understand civitas, not as a city of God. So when you find that these things have happened, where is this word political? Nowhere. It wasn't there anywhere. So when people talk about the church-state controversy, church-state controversy in the medieval period, what is the church-state? There was no state. State is a modern institution, absolutely modern institution. There is no state in any ancient and medieval period of any part of the world. So all those books that are written as state and government in ancient India, state and government in ancient Greece, all those can be taken and dumped in the dustbin. Because there was no state till the modern period. So I'll stop here today and I'll meet you tomorrow. And we start understanding this imperium sacerdotium controversy without getting into the church-state controversy. That is not a word that we will be using. What time shall we have our class? 6 is fine, right? Because the first years contacted me rather late and they said they'd like to come at 5. And so I said, all right. So we'll stick to 6 with you. So tomorrow I'll be taking their class at 5. All right. Thank you very much. And I know we've got a bit slow again, but I had to give you these details because these are the foundational principles of political thought. You have to know the foundations of this particular phrase, political thought. It's a modern phrase. You should know that state is a modern institution, a modern word. And modern begins with 15th, 16th centuries CE. Thank you and see you tomorrow at 6. Thank you very much for your cooperation.